Hi, everybody. It's very nice to be here with you today at this really exciting conference. So as you just heard, I'm Julie Diamond. I'm an executive coach. I'm a leadership consultant. And my company provides coaching, assessment, and training to leaders around the world. Let me start with a true and false question with you, okay? True or false? The higher you rise in your career, the better and more accurate your hiring decisions become. So how many people think that that's true? The higher you rise in your career, the better your hiring decisions. How many people, it's hard to see, how many people think that's true? Nobody at all thinks that's true. So that means you read my notes, or you're just skeptical, you sense a trick coming. Right, actually, it's false. Every single one of you is right. It's false because the higher up you go, the more motivated people are to change their behavior towards you, right? The more power you have, the more people change their behavior towards you. So what happens is that your rise in power is matched by a drop in their authenticity, right? People are motivated to impress you. They're trying to impress you. So they're putting on an act for you, whether they know it or not. Oftentimes it's unconscious. So you're not really judging people, you're judging an act. So our power has an enormous impact on the people around us, changing how they relate to us. And this makes it hard, almost impossible for us to understand the impact that we have on other people, and importantly, on the culture of our organizations. So it's like a vicious cycle, right? The more power you have, the bigger your impact. But the bigger the impact you have, the more the people behave around us. They want to impress us, right? They change their behavior. And so the more that people change their behavior, the harder it is to really assess the impact we have on other people and on the culture. And this creates a blind spot, dangerous blind spots, in fact, for managers, because they can't really see the effect they're having on the people around them accurately. As Robert Sutton says here, the professor of management at Stanford University Business School, because I'm a manager, because of how people change their behavior towards me, I have a flawed and incomplete understanding of what it's like to work for me. Now, we know, it's become common knowledge that power changes people. I mean, this is not a new idea. We have a phrase for it, an expression. It's called power corrupts, right? We sort of all have heard that. But we don't really appreciate, what we don't often realize, is that power doesn't just change us, it changes the people around us. Our power influences how free people feel to speak up, to contribute, to take risks, and to ask questions. And this, in turn, has a huge effect, not just on the culture, but on business outcomes, influencing everything from productivity to decision-making and innovation. So how do we make sure that our power is not silencing, is not altering people's behavior, it doesn't shut people down, right? And that we're getting honest feedback, that people are able to disagree, to raise a red flag if needed, and then to bring their very best thinking to the table. So this is what I'm going to talk with you about today. I'm going to talk about the psychological influences of power on leaders and on culture, and present the keys for how to use power in ways more effectively to be agile leaders, leaders who can empower, create cultures of collaboration and engagement, and healthy and productive workplace cultures. So I work with leaders primarily and leadership teams on how to engage and empower and bring out the best in the people they lead. I'm not an agile expert. Actually, I'm not even an agile beginner. So, but my work with leaders and leadership teams on what inhibits and what enables participation and engagement, I think will have relevance and resonance for you today. So let me be brave and try and ask you another question. Maybe I'll get a little bit more response. How many of you, it's not a trick, how many of you have ever been promoted and then you find yourself leading your former teammates? Oh, thank God. There's some response. Yes, many of you actually. So you know how it feels then, right? So you go to work on Monday, you get promoted. Now it's Tuesday. You walk in, you're the same person, you had the same breakfast you had the day before, you're wearing the same clothes you've always worn, you have the same haircut. You're just the same person, but everybody treats you differently. You're not having the same conversations you had with people the day before. You're not even getting the same answers to the questions you asked the day before. People are now treating you differently, right? You're no longer you. You've become a symbol of authority. And I call this the lens of power. And through this lens of power, people see you differently, right? They don't see the old you they saw the day before. They see a figure of authority. And they have different feelings towards you, and they behave differently. So what do they feel? What's going on with them? As they look at you now, on Tuesday, through this lens of power? Well, one thing they probably feel, or they may feel, is awe and admiration, right? So there's a reflex we have with power to look up, right? We hesitate to speak up. We may feel that the person in positions of power know better, that their opinions matter more than ours do, right? Or maybe we want to please people in power, so we tell them what we think they want to hear, not necessarily what we're really thinking. So that's one reflex about power. There's another one, which you're probably all thinking, which is that we also look at people in positions of power with skepticism and mistrust, right? We're also conditioned to mistrust people in authority. So yesterday you were their friend, and now you're playing for the other team. You're on the other side, right? So people are more protected, they're more defensive, maybe they're a little bit more guarded in what they're going to reveal to you. There's also security issues. People look out for their livelihood. Their career might be in your hands. Their advancement, their promotion, maybe their very livelihood now depends on you or people in authority. So they may be afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing or making a mistake. So again, they're going to hold back. The other thing is ambition. Let's face it, we're all climbing the ladder. So now they may look at you as somebody who could advance their career. You used to be their friend, now you have a little bit more authority. Maybe you could help them out, do something good for their career, or just maybe support their idea or their pet project. It could also be that they see you as standing in their way, right? That you're now a rival, or there's a little bit more competitive feelings, right? So, and finally, there's unrealistic expectations, right? Somehow this is also a reflex we have when we think about authority, is that we expect that people in authority can accomplish amazing, heroic things. We place unrealistic expectations often on leadership. So now people are looking and expecting you to be able to accomplish great things, not seeing that you have the same roadblocks, you have the same obstacles, you have the same challenges you had the day before, right? They're just different. So what's the cost of this lens of power? What is the actual drop in value to our organizations? Well, for me, it's a human diminisher. It's a diminisher of creativity, of talent, of feedback, and of engagement. One of the most expensive things that companies spend money on is talent. And when people don't speak up, when they hesitate to contribute, it's an incredible waste of expensive talent, right? People hold back their ideas and opinions and then don't bring that forth. It also, this is another problem, it leaves leaders isolated, dangerously isolated. When people feel disempowered, they don't look at people, at managers or as leaders, as partners, as coworkers, as people who actually need help. So they leave, this means that they don't feel that they have anything to help out with a problem. They leave managers to sink or swim or flounder, not realizing they could be contributing solutions. This also puts businesses at risk, because when people don't speak up, you don't know where the problems are. People don't ask for help maybe until it's too late. So managers have no idea where things are going wrong. And the paradox of a hierarchy is this, that the higher up you go in an organization, the more dependent you are on people below for information. But the greater the risk is that the information that you get is not forthcoming. Or if it does come, perhaps it's incomplete or biased in some way. So your decision making is really compromised, and that's really problematic. You're not making decisions with the full information and input that you need. So being an agile leader, as we know, means really knowing the impact that power has on people. We need to push power down. But how can we successfully do that when power has the tendency to silence or the tendency to produce the opposite sort of unintended consequences? So let's take a minute and let's look at some of the research. What are the psychological effects of power when someone steps into a position of power? At 8,000 meters above sea level, your body starts to die. This is the zone, this is the altitude that climbers call the death zone. It's 900 meters below the summit of Mount Everest. And in this death zone, the air is dangerously thin. Oxygen levels are a third of what they are at sea level. You have 2 days before you completely run out of air. And as your body starts to deteriorate, your mind abandons you. You have less oxygen entering your brain, so your judgment becomes impaired, right? You become confused. You start to falter. You begin to hallucinate. You're actually losing your mind right when you need it the most. And just like the oxygen-thin atmosphere in the upper reaches of Mount Everest, the rarefied air of power and high status alters our minds too, diminishes our judgment, and distorts our perceptions. But here's the difference. On Mount Everest, climbers know they're dying. They feel awful. They suffer pounding headaches. They vomit, right? They lose coordination. They have trouble standing and walking. And so they're completely aware that they're dying. But in the embrace of high power, what happens is we start to feel fantastic, right? The more altered we become, the better we feel. Our confidence rises when we step into positions of power, right? Our confidence rises, but our self-consciousness diminishes. Our capacity to feel empathy for others actually lessens, just as the influence we have over people increases. And the more we need guidance and feedback from other people, now that we have increased responsibility, the less we tend to seek it. And this is actually what research shows, right? That being in a high power role has psychological influences on our attitude, behavior, and feelings. And let me break this down for you. The first influence that research shows is that people in a high power role are more disinhibited, right? They're less concerned with the opinions of others, and they're more captivated by their own ideas. They're freer to act on their impulses and their instincts, right? Their self-consciousness and self-doubt diminish. Now, some of you may be thinking, wait, is that a bad thing? And you're actually right to ask that question, because to be a leader, you need a degree of disinhibition, actually, right? In order to make decisions and take risks, you can't be too influenced by the opinions of others, right? You need disinhibition to be creative, to think outside the box. And not just leaders, but entrepreneurs, social activists, creative entrepreneurs, or creative pioneers, rather. These people all need disinhibition to challenge the status quo, to transform teams, transform organizations, and even transform society. But obviously, taken too much, a disregard for all feedback and input, too much believing in your own ideas, has its own problems, right? Second influence, a high power role produces a psychological effect known as an illusory sense of control. Have you ever wondered, like politicians and CEOs, how they can be so completely confident of their decisions and take great risks with like feeling absolutely confident about a positive outcome, you know? We think it's politically motivated, you know, trust me, it's going to be great. Or something that I think about a lot, especially these days, is how can people in the public eye, you know, leaders or famous people in the public eye, people with a lot of power, conduct illegal activity using text messaging, emails, and digital communication, like believing their digital footprints will never be discovered? And have you ever wondered that? I wonder that a lot. So researchers call this an illusory sense of control, right? And what that is it's a belief in your ability to influence outcomes beyond your control, right? Outcomes that not only do you have no control over, but outcomes that are often determined by chance, even like rolling the dice. So an illusory sense of control happens whenever you underestimate the risks and you overestimate the chance of a successful outcome. And yes, like disinhibition, you may be thinking, maybe there's something good for leadership here too as well. And you're right, because this is very similar to optimism and confidence. And we know that leaders need optimism and confidence. In fact, personality traits of leaders they're heavily confident, optimistic people. And they need that. They need that to rally people around a cause, to enroll them in a vision, to keep going despite setbacks. And illusory sense of control is what every entrepreneur needs to start a business when there's like an 80% chance of failure in the first year. But as we know, there's a fine line between being confident and optimistic and having a delusional disregard of facts. The third influence is something that you'll recognize easily. If you, like me, enjoy popular culture or indulge in Hollywood movies every now and then, anybody out there? So you notice that how popular characters like these are in popular culture. You recognize some of these? So it's right that Hollywood loves, or popular culture loves, to depict people with a lot of power as cruel, as mean, as callous, maybe even sadistic. And in fact, actually there are many real-life examples to this, because the truth is that there's a kernel of truth. That researchers have found that one of the effects of a high-ranking role is diminished empathy. That when you step into a high-ranking role or a role of power, you're less able to see the impact you have on others. You're actually less able to step into their shoes and feel what they're feeling or experience what they're feeling. That's diminished empathy. In fact, what researchers have found is that people in a high-power role have a tendency to see other people, especially people in lower-ranking roles, through the lens of utility. And that means that they see them as like a means to an end. What can you do for me, right? Now, if you're tracking, you know what I'm going to say next. There is a little bit of value to this in a leadership role, right? And you may be thinking this, that if you, as a leader or manager, were overly concerned about the feelings of every single individual or individual circumstances on your team or in the business, you absolutely could not make decisions, right? That in order to make a decision for the whole, you can't take into account every individual circumstance, right? Whenever we have to make a decision that benefits the future, we have to sort of override the immediate individual concern. I think about, for example, the future of the planet, right? Where the future of the planet depends on, we have to prioritize the environment over and against the inconveniences and the cost of the present. But as we know, this also can be taken and has been taken too far. So, this is the death zone of power, right? You're more in love with your ideas, you're less interested in feedback, you tend to more easily believe in the success of your your ideas, right, of your endeavors, and you're less interested or less able to see the impact of your behavior on others. So the question is, what's the oxygen of great leadership, right? How do we make power work for us and for our organizations and for the people around us? How do we empower others and push power down successfully, given all these influences of power? How can we use power in ways that really creates the psychologically safe atmosphere needed for high-functioning and engaged teams? So let me start by saying what doesn't work. And the reason I'm starting here is because power is a taboo topic, right? And so with every taboo, there's a lot of ideas and there's some misinformation out there, and there's sort of common ways of thinking about it. So there's 4 things I want to talk about. One is that a lot of people feel that if we flatten teams and organizations, there will be fewer problems related to power misuse. Look, there's a great reason to flatten teams, to remove titles, to remove layers of management, and to create processes and tools for a more egalitarian workplace. I mean, in great part, that's what you're doing, right? That's what Agile is about. It has numerous positive benefits, and in fact, flatter teams and more egalitarian leadership is absolutely the way of the future. There's no doubt about that. But let's be clear, okay? Power dynamics do not go away when we take away titles and positions, right? Because power is not in a title or a position. Power is in a person. Power is a behavior, right? And people will use anything, their loud voice, their friendship groups, their expertise, their insider status, their access to information to exert power. What's more, flat organizations and flat teams often produce the opposite effect. When the visible signs and symbols of power are missing, it gets dangerous because power is kind of underground, right? And underground power is more difficult to deal with, or can be more difficult to deal with. You don't know who makes decisions, right? Who's deciding who gets placed on which team? How do I get access to that project? Or how do I get to work with this person? Who's making the decision? So power dynamics are still present, even when they're invisible. They just come out in different ways. The second thing that I hear a lot in my work is that emotionally intelligent leaders are actually leaders who use their power really well, right? That as long as people have developed their emotional intelligence, they'll really be good with their authority. They won't overuse it. They won't misuse it. Well, emotional intelligence, I like emotional intelligence. It's a great asset for any leader, right? Being able to read the emotions of others, being good with your own emotions, being able to self-regulate your emotions. This makes you a great leader. It makes you a great person, and it definitely makes you easy to work with. But emotional intelligence is what's called morally neutral. So that means that if you're good with emotions and you can read the emotions of other people, and you can also display your emotions in ways that you want, well, you can use that to deceive people, to lie, to manipulate. And we know that scammers, con artists, psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, these are people who score really high on emotional intelligence tests, right? And they're using emotional intelligence in self-serving ways. And we know that's not at all a good use of power. The second thing people I get so excited, I forget to advance my slides. The second thing is culture. So culture is a really big word today. It's a really important word. It's an important concept. There's a lot of focus on culture. And so one idea is that if we have a really great culture, cultures are actually, a good culture is by definition more egalitarian and freer of power dynamics. Well, what's true is that great cultures make for great workplaces. But what is culture? What are we really talking about when we talk about culture? Because culture is not just, shaped by what people say, by workplace practices or HR policies or by vision statements. Culture is shaped by what people do, by behavior. and often unconscious behavior. So it's very easy to have a stated culture and then have like a lived culture that's completely not aligned with the stated culture. And the other thing about culture is that it's very easy for culture to become cult-ish. And, when we really love our culture, when we're proud of our culture, we feel we have a very special culture. The more special we feel it is, the greater the risk that it becomes kind of closed and cliquish, right? We fall into groupthink. We fall prey to exceptionalism. We think we're special. And so what happens is we tend to choose people who fit this wonderful, special culture, who are like us, who look like us, who talk like us, who think like us. And then what happens is cultures become unconsciously discriminatory, preferential, and very non-innovative. And finally, when it comes to power, I think the most common thing I hear about is that it's kind of a character flaw or a personality defect. Because I hear people say, oh, he's just a jerk, or that, she's a jerk, or he's an idiot, or other four-letter words, that we make it a personality issue, like it's just that person. And it's, they have a bad personality. And there may be aspects to that are true, but in my work, by and large, with leaders that I've worked with sort of across industries and sectors, businesses, countries, I've really found over and over about 90% of times when there's been a poor use of power or power misuse, that it's unintended, right? And this is what I see all the time. It's unintended. You don't realize you're doing it. But even worse than that, it's well-meaning, right? You're like, oh, just happily, walking into a room, you didn't realize you stepped on people, you didn't realize you interrupted people. So this is what I see a lot, that it's unintended, it's very well-meaning, and it's almost always sort of unconscious. So in other words, navigating the death zone of power is difficult, but it's definitely doable. So back to my question, what is the oxygen of great leadership? What are the keys for using power in healthy ways that engage and empower others? All right, enough of the Labrador Retriever. We have to say goodbye. Okay, the first one is feedback. Feedback is super critical to use power well, but not just any feedback. That seems too obvious. Feedback that shakes up our cognitive egg. I use this expression to shake up our cognitive egg because what I mean is that we need feedback that forces you or forces us to question our assumptions, forces us to interrogate our biases, to question our preferential way of thinking. Feedback that lies outside of our self-confirming beliefs. So in other words, feedback that feels very uncomfortable. Because the death zone, the psychological influences that we just saw, disinhibition, action orientation, illusory sense of control, coupled with the fact that people are changing their behavior around you. They're not giving you feedback. They're not giving you honest, unfiltered feedback. It means you're not going to get the truth unless you create the conditions for it. Okay, so how do we do that? I'll give you a few steps. For me, one of the most important things in my work is that people are trained to have conflict, right? That you can debate, you can disagree, you can hash things out, and nothing's off limits, but it's healthy, it's productive, it's even fun, right? It doesn't get personal and it doesn't get hostile. That people really know how to bring in all the ideas, right? And it's important that if we don't have these robust discussions, we're really limiting what we're letting in. The second thing for me, especially if you find yourself in a role of power, you're coaching leaders or you're working with leaders, it's really important that there's an outside team or people that the leader or you in a management role can talk to. And when I say outside, I mean outside of your organization. They don't work for you, they don't work with you. So they're free to challenge you because they don't have a stake in the game. Or as we say in English, they don't have a dog in the fight, right? So they're not dependent on you for their livelihood or for anything else. So they can bring in fresh ideas from outside your industry. Question what you're thinking freely without fear of reprisal. The other thing I talk about is seeking out the minority report. And this is really important when it comes time to making decisions. That in a team, that there's somebody, and I always make this a rotating role on leadership teams, so there's no risk of retaliation. Nobody gets typecast as the devil's advocate or the naysayer. But there's an assigned person for every discussion who's going to say, what's wrong with this idea? Why won't it work? Play the devil's advocate. What are we missing here? Some of you may recognize or know the work of Edward de Bono and six-hat thinking, and this comes from that, this ability to sort of look at what we could be missing. The second key is mind the gap. See yourself from the outside in. In human communication, there's a very normal thing called the intent-impact gap. You may recognize it in domestic disputes, when you're arguing with your spouse. That's not what I said. Well, it's not what I meant, but that's what I heard. So we intend to say one thing, but what lands on the other person is very different from what we intended. That's the intent-impact gap. Now, when it comes to power widens that gap, so it's like the Grand Canyon, right? Through the lens of power, I think I'm making a casual comment, but what the other person hears is a command. Or I think I'm having an opinion, right? Or a new idea. What somebody hears is a strategy to follow, right? So my intent is distorted by the lens of power, and others hear our message through that. So our message gets distorted and more important, more definitive, more decisive, and we become more scary through that lens of power. So it's really important that we, in any role of rank, whenever we have power, whether it's positional or other kinds of power, that we seek to close that gap. We make ourselves more approachable. How do we make ourselves approachable? Don't go first. What do I mean by that? Well, leaders take attention. The more rank you have, the more people give you attention. So you're going to walk in a room and people are going to tend to look at you. Or if there's a conversation going on and you speak up and you have more rank or positional authority or whatever, people are going to stop talking. They're going to listen to you. So if it's really important to bring all the ideas out, let's say you're making a decision or you have to have a brainstorming session, if you speak first, you will get less new ideas coming forth. Research shows that people will follow the idea of the most dominant member on a team, right? Or the person who speaks first. And this is proven in research. So if you have that rank and it's important for you to hear from everybody, don't speak first, right? Wait for people to speak, right? And then bring in your ideas. I actually coach a CEO who's extremely assertive and dominant personality, and she calls her opinions hard opinions and soft opinions because her leadership team tends to defer to her, the force of her personalities. So she lets them know if that's like a really strong idea or she's just kind of entertaining ideas. So make it easy for people to speak and give feedback to you. So closing the gap, making yourself approachable, it's really important to reward participation. So what do I mean by that? Well, behavior doesn't change if it's not rewarded. And this is really important. So a lot of leaders that I work with, a lot of really well-meaning leaders, they say the right things. They say, what do you think? I'd like to hear from everybody. My door's open. I'm really open to your feedback. Do you have any questions, right? But that doesn't change behavior. That's not enough. What changes behavior is when the behavior they're asking for is rewarded. So when someone speaks up, you have to acknowledge the contribution. When someone says an idea, you have to acknowledge that they spoke. Recognize the idea. Now, recognizing and acknowledging doesn't mean you agree with it. You don't have to like an idea to acknowledge it. But if people speak up and nobody says anything, what does that do? It trains people not to speak up again. It says it's not worth it. Nothing happened. I spoke up, nothing happened, I won't do it again. So rewarding participation is very, very important. This one's really simple, really obvious, we all know it, but I want to include it. Ask questions. If you have any position of power, and that could be not positional, but let's say you have a lot of expert power, it's really important that you ask questions. What you model becomes a norm for others. If you're asking questions, it teaches people it's safe to ask questions. The third key I want to talk about, maintain composure. This one's really big. In my work, what I see over and over again is that most misuse of power happens when leaders feel weak. When you feel powerless, you use your power poorly, right? When you feel powerless, why does that happen? Because powerless means you're under stress. You're threatened, right? You're under attack. Things are going wrong. It's an emotional moment. You're overcome by emotions when you feel powerless, and that's fight, flight, or freeze. And that's normal. That's human, right? But in a high power role, acting out of your emotions, just reacting emotionally, can be deadly, right? It diminishes your credibility. It undermines trust on the team. It teaches people to stay away from you, that you're scary, that you can't be trusted, and it just creates a cascade of unintended consequences. There's some research, depending on the research, there's a lot of research on this, that it takes somewhere between 20 and 30 positive comments to override the influences of one negative or harsh comment. So from a leadership role, if you react, if even yell, scream, but I see even eye rolling or sighing or sarcasm or muttering under your breath. These are incredibly damaging and difficult behaviors that when you're under stress, if you just let that out, it has terrible consequences. So what are the keys? Self-regulation is the key, really, to using power well. And the very first thing for me is knowing your triggers. So I assume people know what triggers are. Triggers are things that set you off. There's certain people that always make you react a certain way, certain problems, certain situations, certain conversations at work just drive you nuts, right? So it's really important that you know what those are and that you develop strategies to calm yourself down, to not react, whatever that might be. It could be mindfulness, meditation, taking a walk, breathing deeply, whatever it is, and there's lots of methods out there, but it's really important that you manage your triggers. You know what they are, you know when they're going to occur, and you have strategies for calming yourself down. The second thing for me is taking care of your physical self. And this is really important and sometimes overlooked, that you're more susceptible to stress and you're more susceptible to reacting when you're tired, when you're hungry, when you're run down, when you haven't slept. Your physical self and your emotional self are like one and the same, right? So you've got to be able to take care of your physical self, that your emotional reactivity is going to be easier to manage if you're taking care of your physical self. Have a life outside of work. This might actually be easier in Spain than it is in the United States and other countries. It's a cultural thing. But I say to people that having a rich and meaningful life outside of work is really important for maintaining composure, because when things go wrong at work, and they always will go wrong. Things will go pear-shaped. It'll be chaos. It'll be terrible problems. If you have a corner of your life that feels rich, nourishing, where you feel well and balanced, whether that's family, friends, pets, whatever that might be, hobbies. When things go wrong, not everything's lost, not everything's at risk. There is a place in your life where there's balance and peace. And finally, have people to talk to, right? It's really important that we have friends, family, mentors, advisors, coaches, even therapists, because stress is not going away anytime soon. We're always going to become emotionally reactive. It's part of the human condition. There's always going to be new challenges that rattle us. So we need safe places we can go to vent, to complain, to get help, to get input. It's very important. Remember, one emotionally unstable manager, and I've seen this over and over again, can wreak havoc on an entire organization. Finally, the last thing is that when we talk about power, let's remember not to get hypnotized by positional power, by social status or social identity. There are lots of kinds of power, and there's lots of ways to use power, and they're always at play at workplaces and organizations, okay? It's not only up to those in positional power or authority to do good with their powers. We're all superheroes, and we all have superpowers. We all have to dig deep and to find the power we have and to use it for good. So, for example, if you have the superpower of social boldness, you have a loud voice, you can speak up, you can make yourself heard, you can get the floor, you can advocate for your own opinion and idea. Do you use that superpower to do more than just putting your idea forward? Do you also advocate for others, invite in newcomers, or maybe advocate for people who are less able to speak up, and make sure that we're hearing every idea, not just the loud ones, the dominant ones, or the first ones? Maybe you have the superpower of knowledge, intellect, expertise, right? You're highly intelligent, or you have a lot of knowledge and experience. Do you share your knowledge and experience with others? Do you use that superpower to make sure that you're making the very best decision? Or do you just use it to be the smartest person in the room, right? Do we use our knowledge to mentor and coach others, or to just advocate for our own project or idea? Finally, maybe you have the superpower of a really deep and extensive network of people. People like you. You're popular. People are motivated to help you out. That's an incredible power to go through life with. Do you use that superpower to make a seat at the table for other people, or do you use it to just kind of hang out and feel good and popular in your group, right? Do you use that network to find opportunities for others, maybe less advantaged people, or only to further your career? So take an inventory of your powers, right? Ask yourself, what powers do I have? Do I use them? Where do I use them? And how do I use them? Do I value them? Or am I only valuing positional power? It's really important that you get feedback from others on where they see your powers. Ask a friend if you feel up to it. Where do you see my powers? Because remember, it's impossible for us to see our own power. That is one of the problems with power. So you may be surprised. Chances are you're more powerful than you think you are. So power impacts us in ways that we're not always aware. Actually, in ways that we can't be aware because of the blind spot. The more power we have, and not just positional, but all kinds of power, the less able we are to see our impact. So we have to learn the effects of power, right? Of all our kinds of power. How does it operate on us, and how's it operating on other people? And we need to know these keys for using it well, to empower others and to create the change we want to create. So we need to make sure that whatever power we have that gives us rank, that we're getting that oxygen we need, right? That we can stay focused and fresh, that we understand the impact of our power on others. And just to go over what they are again, remember, feedback, the oxygen of great leadership. Shake up your cognitive egg. Don't just ask for feedback, create the conditions for truth-telling, okay? Mind the gap. See yourself from the outside in. Make it a practice to see yourself as others do. Remember, you're scarier than you think you are. Even if you don't have the positional power, your powers do make you scary at times to other people. Maintain your composure. Watch out for getting overwhelmed by your emotions or reacting out of your emotionality, and develop methods for maintaining, sort of managing your stress. And finally, remember and use all your powers. It's not just positional power. We all have powers that we use daily, whether we know it or not. So the question is, how are you using your powers, and what's your impact? So thank you very much. That's all for today. Thank you. Thank you.